Today I get the lovely opportunity of talking with B.A. Pepper. She brings us into her Welsh world. We have magic, witches and wielders, gods, trials, betrayal, and a Welsh word of the day. We are talking all about Daughter of Stone, which has just been released, so I hope you enjoyed this episode. Welcome to Busy Reading Romantasy, a video podcast that discusses books that merge elements of romance and fantasy while occasionally exploring other genres. We get to escape our world and dive deep into themes of good versus evil, power dynamics, and all of the delicious taboo topics. Curiosity and open-mindedness are a must. That being said, this is a podcast for mature audiences only and will contain spoilers. Your mental health matters, so be sure to check the trigger warnings of each book to decide if this is the right episode for you to listen to. Now, let's get into today's episode. But first of all, your hair, absolutely fantastic.
Oh,
beautiful shade.
Thank you.
Do you always do like fun colors or?
Like yes and no. I've like not done it. It's been like in a in-between phase. So I had like really red hair for a while. And then I kind of had like a little bit of a mental breakdown and was like, red's too normal. Like I need to go back to like crazy colors. Because I had it black and blue for a bit, like black and purple. And then my hairdresser was like, I'll just put a purple on the red, it'll be fine. And it was not fine. And it turned out the purple had like peroxide in it that I didn't know. And my hairdresser told me off. And it didn't like ruin my hair, but he was like, we're not bleaching it for the longest time. So for like months, I've kind of had like janky hair. And I've just had to like deal with it. And then this week was like, he was like, if you're good and you treat it right, I'll like dye it for you. And then we did. So I'm like, yes, I'm back.
There you go. Yes, I'm back, baby. That is, I did red for a while, about as red as brown hair could get without like bleaching or anything. But it's fun. I've since let it breathe, but also I got this streak when I turned 25. Hair just went white in that patch, and so I'm like, now I won't dye my hair. That's just it is what it is. So I know I love it. Yeah, well, thank you. And you're over in the UK, right?
Yeah, in Wales, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what is weather like this time of year?
So, I mean, Wales, I think in terms of like amount of days of rain and rainfall, we have the most in the world. Like I think we even beat out Washington State. Most of the time it rains, but this autumn has been really like dry and crisp. So it's actually been really nice recently. We've had like sun, but like cold, like perfect like autumn weather.
Yeah.
I'll say that now and it'll rain for like 3 weeks.
Of course. They're like, haha, you thought.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I am originally from Washington State. So totally the minute someone says rain, I'm like, yes, I understand. But I've lived in Florida now for a while, and I'm actually sporting a really sick sunburn. Like it looks pretty good on camera, but this was also like, this is a week old now. So, but I always like to ask that question because I think being in Florida long enough where it's just like warm all the time, and I forget what the rest of the world goes through in terms of that. But awesome. Well, before we get started, I thought it would be fun if you'd like to give us a little Welsh word of the day. We're going to talk about Daughter of Stone, and there are a number of words thrown in there. But if there's anything top of mind that you'd love to share.
So it's not in Daughter of Stone, but it probably, I'd say like if anybody knew any Welsh, I feel like this is the word that they would know. And it's cwtch. So it's spelled Cwtch. And it means like a cuddle. It's like a Welsh term for a cuddle. But like you use it, like you can't, it actually probably doesn't have a translation because I don't feel like a cuddle is like, but it's like, I'll say it to my daughter, like you say it, like, do you want a cwtch? It's like, do you need, you need like a little something right now, you'll be like, come and have a cwtch, So yeah, it's a cute, but it can also be used like in my daughter's school, they use it as like a way to say like, the kind of little like cubby corner where they sit down and snuggle up. The corner can be referred to as a cwtch as well. So like sometimes it's kind of like and you'll sometimes get like cafes here called cwtch because it's like a, like a little,
like the cozy vibe. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I love it.
Yeah.
It's so cute.
Oh, yay. Okay, I'm so glad I asked that. I get to see my boyfriend after this, and I'll be like, let's have a
Yeah.
little catch.
Do you want to cut? Yeah.
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 Beautiful. Awesome. Well, I would love to know more about just kind of your background. Were you a big reader? What did you read? And then when did you get into writing?
Yeah, so I've always loved reading. But it's really common in Wales that you can go to Welsh language school or you can go to English language school. And Welsh language school is not private, like it's like state school, like you just have the
Mhm.
choice. And as it's a language that's kind of on the rise again, it's quite common for parents in the UK or in Wales to
Mhm.
send their they're not speaking Welsh, but they send their children to Welsh school. And that was the case with me and my sister. So we went in at 4, we didn't speak a word of Welsh, and they're just like, go. But like
Mhm.
kids' brains are so absorbent. And I love my language and I don't regret it, but my brain got cross wires and I kind of developed like, I don't want to say dyslexia because that isn't the official term for it, but like you spell phonetically in Welsh, you don't spell phonetically in English. And my brain just got all a bit
Mm.
cross wired. And at the time, they wanted to keep me back a year in school, and I was like, I don't want to do that. But my reading was always really good. It was just my like written English. So
Mhm.
the head teacher of the school at the time was like, I think she should just start reading as much as she can in English to
Mm.
because the more you see the words, the more you like learn to understand them, and that's really where it came from. And I mean, I was, like of the teenage years of like Twilight and the Hunger Games and all of those kind of books. So
Mhm.
I just always read. I loved fantasy. And like Lord of the Rings came out when I was probably like 6 or 7.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I just always loved it. So I loved escaping. I think that was the biggest thing for me. And I
Mhm.
just write, I think, as like a natural thing of like I loved making up stories in my head. So I would write them down. I remember seeing the first Lord of the Rings film and had no idea that there was a second book because like I had no concept that they were books before they were
Right.
movies when I was 6. And I was like, I'm gonna write this next one. And I'm gonna write like as if like it didn't already exist.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, and I loved it all through high school. I had some really amazing English literature teachers that just like fostered the love even more. So then I decided to study it in university. And unfortunately, though, it kind of burnt it out for me.
Mhm.
I think studying it in university to that level, I finished uni and I was like, I just can't read another book right now because it was just the
Mhm.
volume that we had to do.
Yeah.
And I really struggled. I was transitioning from like YA into adult fantasy because I felt for me that like some adult fantasies at the time, we're talking a long time ago when I graduated, but I like a bit of high fantasy, but sometimes it was too heavy. And I just
Mhm.
really struggled finding books that I like. Um, so I completely stopped. So I didn't read or write anything for literally nearly 10 years. And then it was in 2022 after my daughter was born, I was kind of going through some postpartum anxiety, I guess. And I was like sitting up all night every night when she was sleeping, like stressing. And I was like, I can't keep just sitting here, like scrolling on the internet. I need to do
Mhm.
something. And I don't know what it was. I just saw a book cover on social media and I was like, that looks good. I think I'm going to read again. I don't know. It was just like this weird thing. And that book was A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I had no
Mm.
idea what it was. I had no
Mhm.
idea like that it was fantasy romance. I literally knew nothing. I just picked it up, got my husband to fish out the old Kindle in our garage. And then that was right at the end of 2022. So I finished it in 2023. And went from reading no books ever for 8, 9 years to then that year, I think I read 110 books.
Wow. Yeah.
And I just found the genre, and because of that, like I found
Yeah.
book talk and I found romantasy, and then you find like more recommendations. And at the same time, I was like, well, I used to write, so maybe I'll do that purely just for like a personal thing, like a mental health thing.
Mhm.
And then it was only when I started the podcast with Sam and I told her about me writing, and she was like, you need to publish that. And I was like, oh, let's not, let's not get too
Hang
hasty.
on there.
Yeah, like this, I'm not taking this seriously, but every year
Yeah.
would roll by where I wouldn't get it out into the world and I would get, a bit gutted with myself. And then, yeah, 2025 was the year I was like,
Yeah.
right, like I'm doing this. So yeah.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Congrats about that. Yeah, thanks for sharing your story. And I think that's maybe a bit more of a common or relatable because in myself, I know my college years and especially a few years after that, where like I was trying to figure out a lot about life very soon that I just, yeah, when you're reading for school, I was like, I don't want to textbooks on textbooks and everything that is like, I don't want to keep reading, or and inevitably found my way back to it. And it's super cool how much it's grown, like you were talking about, with just the use of social media and book talk and everything, that I have words. I've grown such a vocabulary around book reading as a hobby, of like just different tropes and different, I mean, I'm learning new things every day where I'm like, oh, that's what that's called. And to be able to find maybe more specifically the type of books that you like to read, I think is just it's been really fun.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, it was realizing that like I needed romance in my fantasy. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Like, and I guess it
Yes.
makes sense in hindsight that I read things like The Hunger Games and Twilight.
Yeah.
But I felt like at the time, we're talking like 2012, show my age. But I just was missing that. And I know like ACOTAR existed back then and Sergio Mass
Yeah.
existed, but it just wasn't as, I guess, as popular as it is now.
Right.
And more on like the writing side, like self-publishing just wasn't really a thing. I
Yeah.
mean, it was, but it wasn't. I was in university doing creative writing classes by like published authors, and like everybody was the trad route, and like knowing the way traditional querying works, which works for some people, but like I just do not have the skin for it. Like I just didn't have the skin to be
Yeah.
like my book, and they probably will say no. And like you said, you're like 21, you graduated, you need to like start paying bills, and I was like, what am I gonna do? And I just
Yeah.
got a job, and that was that. But yeah, it was only when I started reading again, and like I started reading authors like Carissa Broadbent, who at the time, I
Mhm.
don't even think Serpent and the Wings of Night was out. I think it was just the Daughter of No Earls trilogy, and she was still self-published, like working a 9 to 5. Like LJ Andrews was the same, and I was like looking at these authors who were like literally hitting the Amazon charts, but like they had like a day job, and they were just doing it themselves, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe I could just do this now. I don't have
Yeah.
to like go through the traditional route, I guess.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How did you get the idea of Daughter of Stone? Where did that come from, and how did it evolve throughout your writing process?
So it started as a university project when I first started
Awesome.
university,
Yeah.
as a creative writing class I took, and one of the prompts was something like write the first like 1,000 words of a story, and you essentially have to like give the basic premise of the story in the first 500 1,000 words. It can't just be like an ambiguous 1,000 words. And
Mhm.
I was always going to write fiction. I was always going to write fantasy. I've never been drawn to like real life or contemporary even. And I just loved the idea of like a Welsh witch from a long line of very powerful Welsh witches that had no magic. That was like the basic premise.
Mhm.
And I mean, I wrote it, I submitted it, and I actually kind of kept writing it through university a little bit, like expanding it, but probably I didn't
Mhm.
write much. And then obviously didn't write at all then for so long. And then when I decided to start writing again, it's just always been like that niggling story in the back of my brain, like the story that I never finished, the one that I really feel like, oh, I really like that. So when I started writing again, taking it a bit
Mhm.
more seriously, like I knew it had to be this story. It probably doesn't look much like it did back then in that first 1,000 words, but
Mhm.
like the basic premise was always the same. And then to sit down and write it like this time round, like actually writing it, a lot of it kind of just came over time with it just like rolling around in my head. But I also just decided, because I'm the biggest self-doubter in the world, I'll go back on ideas so many times. But I ultimately just decided I'm going to write the book that I would want to read. That was
Mhm.
my like line with it. So
Yeah.
every time I think of something like, oh, I really want it to be trials, but trials is really oversaturated. Maybe I don't do trials. But I was like, no, I love reading trials. I'm
Yeah.
gonna do it. And that's the best lesson I kind of
Yeah.
accidentally learned, was just writing the book I want to read, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, and thank you for keeping the trials, because that is something I absolutely love as a reader. I'm like, a competition?
hmm
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. Well, before we get into the story a little bit deeper, for anybody who hasn't read Daughter of Stone, can you give a little kind of synopsis overview for anyone who might be interested?
Yeah, of course. So Daughter of Stone follows the story of Non, who is at FMC. At the time of I guess the story starting, she's not having the best time of life. She's in the throes of like depression and a lot of grief. But she essentially is from a long line of very magical witches or wielders, depending on what side you're sitting and what term they call themselves. But she has no magic and has had no magic her entire life, and essentially is like in her mid-20s, working a bar job, kind of barely scraping by. And after kind of a night of like heavy drinking and some bad decisions, stuff happens without too much spoiler. And her grandmother, who is the leader of a very powerful coven, is very powerful, waltzes back in, and she is sort of whisked off to her grandmother's coven and eventually forced to compete in these deadly trials. And that, I guess, is Daughter of Stone in a nutshell.
Yes, so this is the part of the podcast where we are going to get into spoilers. If you haven't read this yet, please pause, go read the book. Absolutely recommend it. I gave this one 5 stars, and then come back, and then you can, enjoy the rest of the discussion. But we are not going to tiptoe around anything. So just to start, I would love to know, what was your favorite scene to write, and what was your most challenging?
Oh, my favorite scene to write. Oh, that's such a good question. This is a really random one. My favorite scene to write was probably after Non essentially almost dies trying to save the Western Coven from an attack.
Oh,
But she
yeah.
wakes up, yeah, in like a healer's cottage called Havina. And Havina was a character that I had no plans for.
Yeah.
Like I always knew there was going to be like a healer, but
Uh-huh.
and maybe I like, like the idea of everything in the Northern Coven and the healer in the Northern Coven being very like pristine, proper, and then Havina is like the polar opposite of that. She's like,
Yeah.
foul-mouthed, like messy, like but I never intended like Havina to be like as much of a character, if that kind of makes sense. And it was just when I sat down and started writing that scene between like Dylan, our MMC, Non, Zen, who is like quite a prominent side character, and Havina, and this kind of like bickering like back and forth between the 4 of them. And I honestly could have written chapters of
I
them
bet.
just like going at each other. But obviously we were like, no, we have to keep going with this
Yeah.
plot. But yeah, that was when she's a character that I didn't plan to be as defined as they are. So I actually really enjoyed writing that scene. One that I found challenging is probably, I wouldn't say, the spicy scene, I guess, because like this is my first book, first ever time like writing like a long form, piece of fiction, and my first time ever writing any kind of smut or spice. Although I have read that by the buckets full, actually writing it is really different, and I'd like to think it won't be the same again, but for me, I found it really cringy and really hard to like uncringe myself, because
Oh,
I think because they're my own characters, like
yeah.
they've lived in my head, that like, yeah, sometimes, and like I would write it, and not to say that like I don't, I'm not writing sentences the same as other authors, but like, the terms and stuff in spicy scenes are often quite similar.
Yeah.
I would step away and reread it, and it would read like, I wouldn't say any other author, but a lot of other authors that I've read, and then, but at the time of writing it, I was like, this is so bad, It was, I said this recently to someone, that like it was probably the least edited scene, in the sense that like I just had to get in the zone, I had to write it, I had to shut the laptop, and I had to like leave, and go away from it for like
Yeah.
a few days. So those are probably the 2 I would say.
Okay, I love it. First of all, with your favorite scene, I've quickly realized that that has become one of my favorite like archetypes, character types, is just there's something about this older woman who knows exactly what she's talking about. She's not going to pull any punches. She's no nonsense. And like in my head, they're often the ones that they're like 5 steps ahead, and they're like, whenever you're ready to catch up. And, inevitably everyone listens to them, but they're like, yeah, I told you. I just really enjoy that type of character. And I think that's the type of person I want to be when I grow up. It's just,
Yeah, 100%.
yeah, that sassy old wise woman that's just like, here you go. I'm gonna go do what I gotta go do. And then definitely we are gonna circle back to the spicy scene. and so excited to talk about that. I think the way you brought up the consent conversation, I've never read anything like that, and you made it so sexy. I
Oh,
loved
good.
it.
I'm
I loved it.
good.
So it's always interesting to hear what authors might struggle with and why, because it's interesting hearing you say that, because when I read it, I wouldn't have guessed that like at all, at all.
Okay,
Um,
good.
yeah. So I guess kind of just setting the scene for this like world that you've created. Also, forgive me because I will butcher things. You were so
That's okay.
kind to provide a lovely pronunciation guide in the beginning. And then I was like getting overwhelmed and I was like, I'm just gonna go forward. So I know you'll correct me as we go, but I'd just love to know kind of how you went about creating this magic system. And we have the wielders and the witches. I think you did a great job of explaining where their power came from and why, and kind of just how things have evolved. But I'd love to just hear your words on how you essentially created this world and how the magic works.
Yeah, so I mean, a huge inspiration I say all the time is like Welsh mythology and folklore, but I guess like that is quite like a well, what is that? You know, like where does it come from? So
Yeah.
in Wales, we have like a collection of stories that are known as the Mabinogion, and they are essentially for thousands of years would have been like spoken stories. So they weren't written down; they were just like stories that were told about, you know, witches and giants and gods and all sorts of magical things. But then roughly in about like the 1920s, somebody sat down and kind of essentially was like the first person to write them down, and they were called the Mabinogion. So you can get copies of this in English now, and
Oh.
you know, I've got English copies as well as Welsh copies, and it's all these short stories collected into a book. So they don't necessarily like follow a linear path; they all kind of go off. But that was sort of my inspiration for the world building, was like modern day, because this is kind of set in modern day technically, if modern day had witches. um but what would modern day Wales look like if the Mabinogion was our like real, I guess is the way to
Mhm.
put it. So a lot of inspiration I drew from the Mabinogion, and I said this the other day when I was talking to someone, like I encourage everyone to go read it, because I think there's so much, particularly as romantasy readers, you'll go, oh my gosh, this is where this author got this from, because it is like the, you know, like Gwydion is from the Mabinogion, the Cauldron is from the Mabinogion, you know, you'll see that in Sarah J Maas's work, everywhere, you know,
Mhm.
Annan, Anufan, that's all, you know, the Mabinogion. But what I will say for my stories as well, there's like some things in there that could be spoilers. So like
Mhm.
I wouldn't say completely, but I always just like err with caution to
Fair.
like don't get upset with me if there's things that end up being spoiled in book two.
Fair.
But I do change things. But yeah, so that was a lot of it. And then I always knew I wanted to do witches, but then I just felt like the term witches didn't feel right. I wanted there to be this like divide. I wanted there to be this real clear divide in the children of Hir and the children of Dawn. And I was like, yeah, like I just feel like they would call them, they just don't want to be like associated. I made that decision, and I was actually really concerned about that in particular, because I was so worried about it being too confusing, because we have
Mhm.
like two founding creators that everybody has powers from. Um, they all used to be called witches. Now some of them call themselves wielders. And
Yeah.
then within this, we also have vassals, which essentially all the gods then choose somebody
Mhm.
to like harness their power. The vassal side of it actually comes from anime. I'm a huge anime fan, um,
Amazing.
like a massive anime fan. And
Yeah.
my husband got me into One Piece recently, and I've watched like all 1,300 episodes in like 2 years.
That's
Uh,
I've started last year and I'm only like 130 in. I'm really
okay.
slacking.
So yeah, and it was like in an arc, in one of the arcs, there's like
Yeah.
vassals of this shogun, and I just heard it and I was like, I love that. And then when I like researched the term, I was like, oh, it makes sense to what these in my story, what these are going to be.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's kind of, I guess, like where the world building came from.
Yeah.
There are things that I've changed from the Mabinogion, like I've had to add people into like certain houses that maybe don't follow, only because of like in the Mabinogion, there's only three children of Dawn and three children of Hir, and that didn't seem like epic enough, you know, for like a pantheon
Fair.
of gods.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then so you kind of touched on it right at the beginning of the question, but as of right now, the time of this release, on my website, I am going to have available like audio pronunciations of all the terms. So
Yeah.
I'm going to record myself saying everything. So if
Oh,
people
perfect.
ever, even if like the guide at the beginning is like not enough,
Yeah.
that will be available.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you, in my opinion, did a fantastic job of, I felt like I tracked it very well, which for me, when it comes to reading, it can be a give or take. It's like a straight 50-50 whether I decide to ingest like the kind of history and the setup, like more of the world
Hmm.
building aspect. And I think even with so many Welsh words and like unfamiliar words to me, you did fantastic of, I was able to follow it very well and I understood. There weren't a lot of moments where I was like, "Wait, what?" You know? So
Yeah.
I think that was a great setup, and even the way you had the different, um, the directions north, east, south, west, and just kind of the history on that. I think one of my favorite things I always say about reading fantasy is that it gives us this fake world, right? It's not real, but it often very much mirrors issues that we face today, or just that we've faced, we face in our normal life. So I think getting the history and seeing kind of more of the political aspect and how certain groups get cut out, and those kind of how all those come to play. I was like, oh, this makes sense. Unfortunately, sadly it makes
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
rather than,
Yeah.
um even throughout the competition, um in situations where it's just kind of expected to just cut down anyone in your path, and then you get someone like Non who's like, well, maybe let me just help people. And that was my
Mhm.
first thought too, is when it comes to granting, like, getting favor from the gods. And I was like, maybe they don't want to favor bloodthirsty people. Like, maybe they want to have someone who will do great with their power. Crazy
Yeah, and I
idea.
no, and this is the thing, like it's I don't talk about too much in the actual like story itself, but at the beginning in the
Yeah.
glossary, I do outline the gods on each side, and there's
Yeah.
five on each side, and I mean you've got 10 gods to potentially like curry favor with, and not every
Yeah.
god is going to look for the same thing. So yeah, like
Right. That's right.
100%, there's no like right way of doing
Yeah.
it. Not
Yeah.
everybody's going to go in and want to like slice and dice each other.
Right, exactly, exactly. Yeah, so I'd like to know a little bit more, just looking now at the characters, especially our main characters, Non and Dylan, and just kind of getting to know them a little bit deeper. If there was any particular inspiration on like why you wanted them the way that they ended up.
Yeah, so for non, I'd say I really, as a reader, I really resonate with characters like the likes of like Nesta Archeron, right? Like I'm a Nesta
Mhm.
girl. Like I
Same.
am, yeah, like I do really not I don't say bad things, but like I sometimes don't have a rein on my anger. Like I'm messy. And they're very polarizing characters. And I have had people say to me, like, I actually didn't really like non, and I'm like, yeah, and that's kind of the intention, because I feel like if you're not a non or you're not a nester, you're probably not going to like that person very much at times. And
Mhm.
that was the intention. She's so deep in depression and grief at that, and addiction at the beginning of the story, that when you are in the throes of that as somebody who's suffered with things like that, like depression, anxiety, like you're not a likable person all the time. So
Mhm.
I wanted her to have that, like to have that root. um and also I feel like to be, I guess if we were to go more physical, like she's 5'10", she's plus sized.
Mhm.
I wanted her to be, yeah, like a character. I mean, I'm not 5'10", but like, I am plus size, and I wanted her to be a character that I saw myself in,
Mhm.
physically as well. And also with her, I think it was really important, like, again, like what is sometimes seen as her like more wittier quips about things, because she does have, quite a few of them, I never like wrote them to be like, ha ha ha, like this is such a, witty quip. It was more like if you were thrust into this world, you had like no concept of it, which
Mhm.
often is like a trope in fantasy, like, you know, regular girl goes into a magical world. But like for me, I would be commenting on these things. Like I would be saying like,
Yeah.
what is going on? This is so weird. But yeah, I guess that's how she became like this rounded, fully formed individual. And then for Dylan was harder because I had never intended for this to be dual POV when I was
Oh, yeah.
it was never I never intended for Dylan to have a POV, but as I started writing, it was just like, oh, I feel like some of these scenes, particularly the one where like Non's training for the first time and he's watching from like a
Mhm.
distance, like it just he needed to be able to describe that scene as opposed to Non. In the first draft, there was like only 5 Dylan chapters, and my editor was like, I love his chapters, but you need to put more in or you need to get rid of them. Like one or
Mm.
and I was like, oh, okay. So I put more in. I stuck it out and I was like, no, he's
Yeah.
staying. But Dylan is a character with a lot of secrets, a lot of things that are not fully explained. And that was hard writing not only chapters, but first person, because it's first person POV. So, like,
Yeah.
how do you still keep some secrecy from the reader?
Mhm.
He knows everything. But I
Mhm.
mean, that was a testament to my editor as well. They were a huge help with helping me do that. But yeah, he's, you know, he's a water daddy. He's like nearly 7 foot. He's tattooed. And like you said, consent is very important to him. And yeah, and he's just like, you know, just dreamy. I mean, I guess is the way to put it. And although like he definitely does some sus things and, you know, turns out to be a little sus, I think without giving too much away for the next book, like he definitely has a good heart, is all I can say. Like his
Mhm.
intentions um are always good.
Mhm.
But yeah, and I mean as soon as the two of them got together on the page, I was just like, oh, like, you know, like they just like magnets, like I couldn't keep them apart.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, I will say as someone who also very much relates to Nesta. Not as much. I've been better at the like speaking up for myself part, but that like inner rage, that anger of just like injustice. And I really feel for Nan because like so much was just happening to her. And to, like you
Mhm.
said, to be thrust in a world where you don't know anything about this, um, and to just be kind of expected to pick it up and act and pretend on so many levels, like pretend that she wasn't part of this family and to not know all these things about her past and like all the not things that aren't her fault but being put on her as her fault.
Mhm.
That's a lot to navigate.
Yeah.
um and yeah, just being in such a crazy environment. Kind of just going through my notes and some different pieces of the plot, I've realized they're not necessarily questions, but if there's anything you'd like to add around kind of your thoughts around the scene or when you were writing it or anything. One of the first moments that I really enjoyed was when she is supposed to go in one of the little summoning circles to go somewhere else because she can't go to this dinner because it would kind of um show that there's more. It was only for specific people kind of on the upper level, and then she
Mhm.
ends up portaling right into the middle of the dinner.
Mhm. Mhm.
Can you talk about that scene a little bit and how that like develops the plot?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, like you said, it's explained that like you cannot do this because you would be able to summon into this location because
Mhm.
it's only for leadership family. And
Yep.
you technically are, like your grandmother is a leader, but we are not letting people know. So definitely do not do that. And
Yeah.
you know, she follows instructions exactly as she's told. And that is like kind of, and I know we're doing spoilers now, so like that is like
Mhm.
huge foreshadowing for ultimately the end, which is the character of Jazz that is like this becomes this really close friend of Non, actually is like acting really shifty the whole way through, but it's just
Mhm.
not as like in your face. So like my intention
Yeah.
with this was always that Dylan was going to be the big obvious, like he's going to betray
Right.
you, so that it took the heat from Jaz.
Yeah.
But Jaz was always doing things, and like readers have definitely picked up. Like I was like, you know, like old people always say, like readers are not stupid. Like they pick
Yeah.
things up like so well.
Yeah.
But that was always the intention, was to like divert the focus. So Jaz is the one that says like, go to this specific summoning circle. Definitely don't out yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, she does the exact opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Jaz is somebody who is attending that dinner and knows exactly how to get to that dinner. But
Yeah.
obviously at the time, I guess as the reader, you're just not looking for those like red flags at that point. You just
Right.
think like, oh, non being non, it's an accident and she's tripped and fallen
Yeah.
and gone into the wrong circle. But yeah, I mean, it ultimately outs her to everyone that she's the granddaughter of the
Yeah.
leader of the Northern Coven. And I mean that she's the daughter of like someone who's essentially been like their number one enemy for many years. So,
Mm-hmm.
and she was in wearing the wrong coven colors as well. So
Yes. Yep. And that's essentially what kind of causes her to get thrown into this competition and the trials.
mhm.
What was your is because I know they said that it was the 3 levels and they follow the same kind of pattern, I believe, beast,
Mhm.
bone, blood. What
Yes.
was your
Mhm.
inspiration behind that and creating what those challenges looked like?
So I feel like a 3 is a very common thing in challenges, and it's just
Yeah.
like a nice number, I feel. Like, I don't know, it was just like it was always gonna be 3.
Yeah.
In terms of the Beast, Blood and Bone, that came right at the end. Like, I had written
Oh,
the
okay.
challenges, like, they were done, but then I was like, I just feel like I need something to, like, why? You know,
Mhm.
why these things? And I was like, well, one's a beast, and I was like, one involves bones, and I was like, oh, could I just do like a BBB alliteration? Like I just kind
Right.
of liked it, and it just, I guess, like, just I'm a very visual person, which is
Mhm.
another reason for things like this is going off on a tangent a bit, but like the colors of the covens, because I felt
Yeah.
like it's very easy to say northern, but like you get a bit, oh, I don't know where I am. Whereas I felt like the
Right.
colors help a bit more with like the
Yes.
visualization of like where we are.
Yep.
So that's why I kind of like the beast, blood and bone. It just like, or the
Yeah.
beast, bone and blood, like it just rolled off the tongue and it was
Yeah.
easy to like remember, you know.
Yeah. I love alliteration, and I don't think I would have remembered it otherwise.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, another part that I really, really loved that I wrote down was at one of the festivals or, like, events, and Non kind of wanders off, and she stumbles upon a tent, where the lady, I believe, that's, like, watching all of the kids is kind of
Mhm.
telling them a bedtime story. What a cool way to, like, add in that world building and give some of, like, the history, because then another kid was asking questions, and then even Non asks a few questions. I don't know, that for some reason that scene just, like, stood out to me of, like, what a cool way. It makes me picture, like, Moana when, you have the teacher that's, like, teaching all the
Mhm.
kids about their history, basically. I felt like a little kid, like, I
Mhm.
was like, "Oh, I gotta learn about this."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, it's like it that's one of the like hardest things in fantasy is like
Yeah.
being info dumpy, and how do you give these like these pages of world building that you need to do without it becoming like essentially literally just like typing it all out. And I
Yeah.
mean, though that section, I was, again, that scene, I was like really worried because like dialogue of that woman speaking is like big, like she speaks for like pages.
Yeah.
um and I remember like when I submitted it to my editor, I was like, oh, like Charlie's gonna absolutely like destroy this. But to be fair, they were like, no, because it makes sense. Like she's
Yeah.
telling a story. So you kind of wouldn't tell stories in like short little bullet points, right?
Right.
Um, and yeah, I mean, at that point, like, and that's another thing that was, I wouldn't say difficult about Non, but like writing a character that has no idea about the world, and neither do you as the
Yeah.
reader. Whereas like often you learn through the main character, but like you're just
Mhm.
this as Non is. So we had to learn together, and it
Yeah.
involves like having to literally info dump onto the
Yeah.
page.
Yeah.
But I guess trying to do it in like the most like the softest way, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, and I just yeah, I kind of like, again, that was a scene that like wasn't really planned, and I knew she was going to wander off and get super drunk, shocker, because that's a very
Mhm.
on brand thing for her. But yeah, I just like the idea of there being this sort of like crash in the tent and all the children, like you said, having like bedrolls and you know,
Yeah.
I'm always an overthinker in fantasy because I always think like, oh, they have all these wild parties, but like, what do they do with their kids? You know, and like, you're not going to mention it, but like, what do
Yeah.
they do with them? You
Yeah.
know?
No, I loved it. And I think that's why it really stood out in my brain, is because it was so unexpected. And I think
Mhm.
I've had enough of like the main character going to like a library and finding a textbook and reading an excerpt on why things were the way they were. And that's totally fine,
Mhm.
but I think I've read it enough that this just really stood out to me. That's why I wanted to mention it, of like, oh, this is
Mhm.
different and it makes sense of why you're
Mhm.
getting all this information in like a fun way.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Another really cool scene that I enjoyed was when um how do you pronounce I picture them as like a dragon. It's a C word, I believe.
Oh, the Kaharai.
Yes, that one.
Mhm.
As they come and attack, and that's where I had mentioned earlier some of the politics around Erin, or no, it was her granny that actually gave the news to everyone to be
Mhm.
like, so we're not going to go help them. And I was like,
Mhm.
that's crazy. I mean, I guess I understand, but crazy. And so
Mhm.
Non and Jazz go defy orders, and they go and help out. And I think that was really cool too, to see more of the magic and how Non literally splits. Because at first I thought like, oh, this will just be like you know, like a decoy where it's just like a projection or like an illusion.
Mhm.
But then when you get her POV and she's like, she literally split herself. What
Yeah.
was it like just kind of writing all of that and putting that together?
Yeah, so again, like with all my beasts and monsters, they all
Yeah.
come from like Welsh mythology or Welsh folklore. So like Cadair
Yeah.
is something that is in I off the top of my head, I don't know if they're mentioned in the Mabinogion, but they're definitely in like what Welsh folklore. So
Yeah.
yeah, like I mean, there's going to be loads of variations of what they look like, but for me, they were definitely this kind of like dragony sort of human, like winged bat-like gross things. But yeah, and you know, Non making that like defied decision to go protect these people because she's like, they're literally getting massacred. Like, I've been there, there's
Yeah.
children, you know, you cannot just leave it. And yeah, I mean, that separation is Jazz's power. So it's Jazz that uses their
Mhm.
power because they're a vassal. They've done
Mhm.
their trials, they've been chosen as a vassal of Gwydion, which is like the leader of the House of Dawn. So kind of like, you
Mhm.
know, I guess if we were talking higher ranking, like Jazz got chosen by like the number one god of all gods.
Yeah.
Um, and he's the god of like deception and trickery. So Jazz's power manifests as literally being able to split
Mm.
someone in two.
Mhm.
But there is a lot of discussion at that point. Jazz says like it can't be for long, you know, because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't tend to do it to people or living things. And Non, literally, we kind of spoke about this earlier, but literally ends up like dying because
Mhm.
Jazz gets knocked unconscious, isn't able to pull back in their power, and essentially literally nearly dies
Mhm.
by being split in half.
Yeah.
Um, so again, without like, because I'm writing book 2 at the moment, and I'm like so trying to keep as much as I can, but
I
like
appreciate it.
I'm very much like everything means something. I am
Yeah.
an Easter egg, like everything means something. So like we're
Mhm.
talking about this scene, like there's so much in that scene that like
Let's see.
means so much
Okay.
in book 2.
Noted. Noted. I'll pay attention.
Yeah.
Um, another scene that really got to me, and what I had wanted to touch on Jazz's character a little bit more, but specifically in the context of, we get a scene where there's another ceremony, essentially, where they go and my brain wanted to say convene, and I was like, that's not the right word. They're not convening with the dead necessarily, but
Mhm.
kind of just honoring the dead and passing along messages. And you get Dylan's, Dylan offers, he's like, we can go do it together so you can kind of see like what's going on, which was super sweet. And Non stumbles across Jazz, who creates does one for their aunt, I believe.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then also, for because Jazz is non-binary, they do one for their dead name, and
Mm-hmm.
that part gave me chill. That made me tear up, actually.
Oh, good.
I have a trans brother, and I thought like that was just such a sweet scene. I think to like just honor Jaz and what like they've been through and everything. So I guess I'm just curious how that came to you to like incorporate that.
Yeah, so I remember thinking of it like Jaz was always going to be non-binary, like that,
Yeah,
and I think sometimes I've asked authors questions like this, like I don't think any author ever like has a character and then kind of goes, "Oh, I'll make them that." Like I feel like your characters like decide for themselves who they are,
yeah,
much like in real life. Um, Jaz was always non-binary, like always, always, always. That was who Jaz was. That's their like character backstory. And as I was writing it, like obviously it's referenced, it's mentioned. I mean, one of the very few good things you can say about Non's grandmother is like she takes no crap when it comes to like Jaz's pronouns. Like straight away, she's
yeah.
like, they use they them pronouns, and you're gonna respect that. Like zip,
Mhm.
like we're not having any. And Non's like, yeah, 100%. Like wouldn't have, you know.
Yeah,
Um, and but I didn't want it to kind of be washed over, if you know what I mean. I didn't just want it to be
yeah,
like Jazz is they them, let's move on. I kind
yeah,
of wanted it to be without, because also as somebody who, you know, is cisgender and but is also queer, so kind of has that toe in the community but has not lived
yeah.
that experience that Jazz has. It was, I mean, it was, I wouldn't say nerve-wracking writing that story, but I think for me, I always, all I ever want to do is to give it the best that I've got and make it the most genuine, as much as somebody who is not non-binary can. So I
Mhm.
remember writing that scene and I thought of it and I was like, oh, I remember thinking about it being like, this feels right, but who am I to say that?
Yeah.
And then I said, just so happened, like a stroke of, I don't know if a stroke of fate, but when I found my editor is non-binary, and
Oh,
so that was kind of like a great partnership. Not just, you know, because my editor's phenomenal, but
yeah,
also meant that I had somebody who could sensitivity read as well as edit and comment on this and be like, as a non-binary person, I can say.
mhm.
And I was so nervous submitting because I just was so worried that I didn't want somebody to read it and be like, oh, that is not a good representation. But
Yeah,
I didn't want it to be glossed over. But then my editor was like, no, like leave it in, like, you know, stay in. And I was like, good, I'm glad. And yeah, I felt like it was, you know, Jaz, I feel like I didn't want Jaz to be a character that had, you know, had this, you know, previous name. I didn't, I think so often in the queer community, not everybody has a positive upbringing, a positive experience, unfortunately. For the vast majority, you
mhm,
know, it isn't that. I, for one, am not that person. You know, I've always had parents. I'm very fortunate. My sister is gay. You know, we've always
mhm.
had parents who are so loving and open, but that is not the reality for the vast majority of people. However, I just felt like I wanted Jaz to be comfortable and not necessarily have there to be this like conflict on the page, if that kind of makes sense. I'm probably not
Yeah,
putting it very, but I kind of didn't, I wanted Jaz to almost have like a healthy relationship with who they were.
yeah,
And kind of, I suppose I don't really touch on the on their wider backstory, but their relationship with who they were and finding themselves was a very positive experience. And they're able to talk about this past life and this previous version of themselves in a
mhm.
healthy way, I guess. And yeah, I guess that's where it kind of came from. But I was terrified to put it in the sense that I was
Yeah.
just wanted to do its diligence, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, I can totally see that, and just, like, caring that you want to, represent that,
Hmm.
and, you make such a great point. I think, 1, it's super awesome that I am starting to see more representation in books of either transgender or non-binary and the pronouns that come along with that,
Hmm.
um, and I do often see that, like, various degrees of either, like you said, seeing that struggle, or they're kind of, um, I don't want to say not past it, but that it's there and then there's like no struggle at all, which is fine
Hmm.
too. I think it was really cool to add that to Jazz's story, and the fact that I think everyone can relate to that to a degree, because it made me
Mhm.
reflect on like even myself, how many versions of myself had
Mhm.
to die essentially to get to like who I am today and everything I overcame. So I think that was just a beautiful ceremony, and cool to reflect on, just to everyone's own individual, degree. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
thank you. I'm so glad, because that was like, yeah, I was so I just knew it. As soon as Charlie was like, yes, it should stay in, I
Yeah.
was like, I trust you. But like,
Yeah.
also it was just such a like, yeah, it's how do you, I want it to be inclusive. I've always wanted this book to be the Wales that I grew up in, the Wales that I
Yeah.
knew, which is multicultural and diverse. But
Yeah.
obviously, as one person, you cannot possibly live the lives of every character.
Yeah.
So thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then circling back to the consent conversation of when Non and Dylan finally get a little hot and heavy.
Mhm.
Again, super amazed just how you did that. I think a lot of times in fantasy, the line is very blurred when it comes to consent. And I always say that there's kind of this like catch all where there's generally good intentions by the author. Like you are trusting that even if it is something like dubcon, or a
Mhm.
little more gray, there's kind of
Mhm.
this general agreement that the male main character is looking out for, the female main character or whatever the dynamic is. Sorry, that's just what I tend to read the most
Mhm.
often. But
Mhm.
so I think the way you did it, where he was almost, there's a degree of confidence and like talking her through it. And it was so sexy to be like, no nodding. I need a yes or no. Like, I just loved that energy. So I know you talked a little bit about kind of how that was a challenge for you, but was there anything else you wanted to add in regards of specifically like the consent conversation and kind of creating that? Oh, and sorry, when she kind of like freezes and he's immediately like, "What was that? What something
Mhm.
happened? Like, tell me more."
Mhm.
Yeah, just all of that was beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think so. I think sometimes, unfortunately, there's this perception that consent isn't sexy, and that's just
Yeah,
so not true. And
yeah,
I agree. As a romantasy reader of literally hundreds and hundreds of romantasy books,
yeah.
and I will say is, as a reader, my personal threshold is probably way like looser is not the word, but like I probably am willing to read things that are a bit more on the questionable side. But
Mhm.
as a writer, I just was like, no, like for me, it has to be spoken, because
Yeah,
like, and not to compare it to real life, but you do put like, real life elements in. And
yeah.
I do feel like sometimes in just fiction in general, where you do have, sexual encounters, like you said, unless it's something that is a specific, specified trigger warning at the beginning of the book. And that is something, because I, 100%, I'm never here to yuck anybody's yum.
Yeah.
In a lot of dark romance, that is something that a reader is actively looking for. And
Mhm.
100% in those type of books is a different conversation. But for me, like that isn't what Daughter of Stone is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just really important. And yeah, like I just wanted it to happen, and it happened naturally, and it be enough. Because yeah, I feel like sometimes a head nod, or is just not enough.
Mhm.
For me, that's just me personally. um and I felt like, a common trope in romantasy is enemies to lovers, right? But I've
Mhm.
never, Daughter of Stone, I will say, is not enemies to lovers. And so I always say it's rivals to lovers. Because I just didn't feel like there was enough time for Non and Dylan to, like, it just didn't make any sense for them to hate each other. There's not
Right.
enough time for them to hate each other to then not hate each other.
Yeah.
But so often in the enemies to lovers world, you do see, because it's like this, I really don't want them, but my body is saying that I do. And to me, I just always, I'm such a rational person, I guess, in my
Mhm.
brain. Like
Yeah.
that I sometimes just struggle with that as a reader, where it's like, but if you're saying no, then like in your mind, what
Yeah.
does your body want it? And I get, like, look, I read it and eat it up so much. I get that I'm totally like analyzing this, but that
Mhm.
was really what it was for me. And I think, we learn it towards the end. Non has had, unfortunately, some really not good, very bad, not, particularly in the beginning of the book, experiences with like non-consent, not from the main character. So again, it was important for me to Dylan to like respect that, even when he doesn't have full context of what happens. Like he says, like he can tell that something is clearly like made her uncomfortable. And as it would, if that had only happened to her like a few weeks ago, the next time somebody touches you in that way, even though it very much might be something that you very much want, your body isn't always going to necessarily just be good, like to go again. And even in like the training scenes, there's a couple of times he says like, am I okay to touch you, before I start showing you where to put your arms in a non-sexual way. And it was just really important. Like I just knew that he, and without giving too much away in book 2, for his backstory, it's also, I feel like when we learn a bit more about his backstory in book 2 and book 3, I think it makes even more sense. And it's not, obviously it's there because just consent is sexy, but like, it also plays into like their bigger character arcs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love it. Dylan, great. I'm gonna ask you about kind of just where everything ends up in book 1. Classic things speed up, and then I was like, wait, that what? After she wins the competition. But before we kind of get into that and what's gonna happen next, is there anything we haven't talked about that you really want to mention?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, fair. Perfect. Well, in that case, can you kind of set the scene for us on just where all the pieces end up and where they're going to pick up in book 2?
Yeah, so I mean, like you said, Non wins the trials, which again was like important to the plot that she wins, but I wanted it to be like she wins by like the skin of her teeth. Like she does not win by being the most skilled. She trips and stumbles her way through these trials and ultimately wins them. And not to give saying that it's all to Dylan's credit, but like he drags her through those trials. He obviously has a agenda to get her in those trials, and ultimately he wants her to win, and there's a bigger reason for that. And I mean, we go to the final like ceremony where they're going to get chosen as vassals on Anisquals, and we find out that Dylan all along has been working with her father. He has this blood bargain. He's dropped the wards. In come her awful father, and her father is like a typical like evil villain, like I've got, well, if you're not going to, play ball, I have something that will make you play ball. And it turns out to be her mother, that he brings in to use as like leverage. Obviously Non's losing her mind. And just before it all kind of like goes to shit, ultimately, her mum reveals that he is not her dad. And then we get the like double, like, because that was always going to be the bigger plot twist at the end. And then I always wanted to have like one more, which was that Jaz is the one that like kind of I feel it comes out of nowhere and betrays, because we expect Dylan, we expect Zen, but we don't really see Jaz coming. And I actually took it out in the first draft because I was worried that it didn't make any sense. And I again questioned myself, and then gave it to Sam, and my beta reader, and Sam was like, put it back in. It makes perfect sense. Like, do it. And I'm glad I did. But and then so she's ultimately like knocked unconscious. The one, I feel like the person I don't feel like you saw was coming is Jaz, and who she believed to be her father is not her father. And that is where we end book 1.
All the plot twists. One, I was really looking forward to seeing what power she would probably get. I believed that she surely would have become a vassal for someone, and then you were like, nope. Also got real nervous when Dylan was acting super shifty after she did the whole "I love him, so I've won." And I knew it was coming inevitably. I thought maybe when she overheard him talking that she was gonna click the pieces together, and I was ready for it. And there's a part of me that's always like, once they've fallen in love and then there's been some secret and they like break up, and then I'm like, come on guys, just get back together, like just love each other. So I was ready for that. kind of happened, but not really. Like we haven't seen the other side of that yet,
Yeah.
or why Dylan is getting sick in her presence. Still super curious about
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Um, and then I definitely did notice Jazz acting a little shifty a little bit as well, but I did not think they would be involved in that aspect. I was trying to put it together with maybe the foxglove situation, which that hasn't been confirmed either technically, but like I was thinking maybe they were doing something on Granny's behalf. I don't know. My brain was trying to put the dots together.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I'm aware I don't have all the answers, but I'm very
No, that's
excited.
and there's like definitely so this is not a spoiler because like people have
Yeah.
DM'd me about this and I will like answer and confirm this because it's not a
Yeah.
spoiler. It's there if you look for it, but not everybody picks it up. But I
Yeah.
will like I don't know if you did. Maybe you're like, yeah, I did pick that up. But it is I don't know if you remember, like there's a scene when Non comes back to her room and
Uh-huh.
Dylan and Jazz are sat together having a conversation and she's like, why are you both here? But like also like I've just been tortured, so like I
Yeah.
want to
So
know.
she just goes to her room. I remember. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and Jazz speaks about their aunt who defected to the West and was killed, and
Mhm.
her wife. And Dylan's adopted mothers were both killed, and one of his mothers. So I don't know if you put the pieces together, but
I did
Dylan and Jazz
not,
are
but that makes
cousins.
sense. Yeah,
Not
okay,
by
I
blood,
see.
obviously, because yeah.
Yeah,
So that's not
okay,
like a spoiler because it's not like
yeah,
a big plot reveal in book two. It's
right,
there, but like it isn't like yeah. Some
yeah,
people kind of were like, "Are they related?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they
yeah,
are."
that's good,
Um,
that's good.
Yeah, but obviously not biologically because he is adopted, but
Yeah,
like for what you know they are. Yeah, so
okay.
um yeah, Jazz has got a lot to answer for in book two.
Oh, I see, I see. I'm excited for
Mhm.
that. What can you tell us about book 2?
Oh, so I can say as of right now,
Yeah,
because I don't know if my editor's going to turn around and be like, no,
fair.
but I feel like I'm going to try and fight my corner that it is going to be three POVs. So it'll be obviously
Oh,
Non, Dylan, and Jazz's POV.
oh, okay,
Um, what else can I say? I mean, book one was not enemies to lovers. I call it rival to lovers. I
yeah,
can say that the starting point in book two is 100% enemies. Like,
okay.
yeah, there's been so
Fair,
much
fair.
betrayal there. And like not just Non, like there's other things that we're gonna find out and other people that
Yeah,
have been betrayed.
okay,
Um we do spend a lot of time in the Western Coven in book two. So we like
okay.
physically go to because at the moment it's all been up north, just
Oh,
in the but we
yeah.
go to the Western Coven in
I'm
book
excited for
two.
that.
And we're also going to go to some other covens, but I can't say too many that we haven't yet been to.
Okay,
Um, what else can I say? Oh, I have always known, ultimately, because this is like a trilogy, so I've always known the end of the trilogy, but I've
okay.
always known like the endings of each book.
Yeah.
And I can say that book two, if book one ending was like a cliffhanger, book two ending is like, oh, like a nosedive, like so
Okay.
much worse.
Well,
Is
thank you
all I
for the
can
warning.
say.
Appreciate it, appreciate it. Can't
Yeah.
wait. So excited
Thank
for
you.
that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This hour has, like, flown by,
Yeah.
incredibly fast, but can you let everyone know, where they can find you to keep up with you and when the next ones are gonna come out?
Yeah, so I'm at BA Pepper Author on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook.
Yeah.
I also have a newsletter on my website, bapepperauthor.com, where you'll get like the most up-to-date information. As of right now, book two is tentatively targeted for end of May 2026, so not too long.
Mhm.
And then the plan is there will be a prequel novella coming out in
Oh,
August of 26,
okay.
which again, I'm speaking as of right now. My editor's probably going to kill me, but it is going to follow. We're going to find it's the story of like Granny's trials when she's that age and like her
Ooh.
yeah. So just like a little, not too much, you know, maybe doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily play into the overall plot, but just like a fun little prequel. And then the plan is for book three to be out in December of 2026. So
Oh, okay.
in a little over a year, full completed trilogy will be wrapped up, I hope.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, thank you
Of
again
course.
so much. Yeah, like I said, this has been a really fun book to become immersed in, especially going from the prologue where my brain was literally like, huh? And then you start in those first few chapters, I was like, yeah, so I need to find out what happens like immediately. So
Mhm,
um
mhm.
as always, thank you for sharing your art, your work with the world. And I'm super excited to see what happens next.
Thank you.
If you've made it to this point in the episode, thank you so much for watching. I'd be incredibly grateful if you showed some support either by following or subscribing, depending on what platform you're watching on, and leaving a comment. You can always follow me on Instagram at Busy Reading Romantasy or on TikTok at busy.reading.romantasy to see what I'm up to. You can also email me at busyreadingromantasy@gmail.com to tell me your thoughts, dreams, secrets, or if you just have any book and author suggestions you'd love me to cover. Grab yourself a good book, get cozy. I'll see you next Wednesday for a new episode.